Do you feel burnt out? Every year, we are bombarded with more information than we previously thought possible. Choices, influences, problems, solutions, conflict, all flying at us at a dizzying rate, increasing and increasing. And for a lot of us, it all happens in one little app. But all of this comes at a terrible cost, and we're already feeling it. Tell me if this sounds like you. Tired all the time, even after having a full night's sleep. Brain fog, like you can't really focus on anything. Emotional detachment. You know, feeling like you're just a robot on autopilot and life is passing you by. Yeah, me too. But you're not alone. In fact, more than 75% of people have reported feeling this way at one point or another. And this, my friends, is a huge problem. And if we don't do something about it, we could be headed for a reality that none of us are ready for. In this video, I'm going to explore the rise of what I'm referring to as burnout culture. And if you're watching this right now, you've probably experienced this in your own life. So I'd like to take a step back, and I'll explain to you why this is happening to us, and more importantly, what we can do about it. So sit back, get comfy, and enjoy tonight's Sleepless Night Tale. Part 1. How did we get here? I know, right? That's triggering as hell. But why is that? In psychology, this is sometimes called a Pavlovian association, or a conditioned emotional response. This usually results in a stress response that activates our body's natural defense mechanism when it senses danger. You know, the fight or flight response. But what could be so dangerous about a phone call? Well, everything. Before I continue, I'd like to preface this with the fact that I am not a doctor or a psychologist, and I do not have professional or formal qualification in this area. I'm just a curious mind who's going through a similar thing that a lot of you are, looking for answers. So I did some digging, and I'd like to share my findings with you, and maybe open a discussion where you can share your own experiences in the comments, if you feel comfortable doing so, of course. So here's my story. Over the last couple of years, I started to notice a rising trend. A change that I saw developing since I began my working life back in the late 2000s and early 2010s, up to how it is now. And that change is that the sheer volume or amount of tasks, messages, and just things we do in a day, just generally speaking, has skyrocketed exponentially. In the early 2010s, I might have had, 15 to 30 emails a day, maybe 2 or 3 big tasks, and maybe 2 to 4 meetings a week. The rest was all just peripheral tasks, and we had a team of maybe 5 or 6 people all doing similar things. We took breaks, we socialized, we got through the day, and then we went home. Sounds normal, right? Then this happened. Suddenly, waiting for an email response was no longer good enough. You could now send someone a text, instant message, and maybe they'd respond if they were available. And that's if you were lucky enough that they, A, used the same messenger app that you did, and B, they were even logged in at all. And I believe one of the big catalysts that changed this was when Microsoft bought the company Skype back in 2011. What happened next was a transition from receiving and processing emails, static messages and tasks from a single source, your inbox, to fragmented communication via multiple chats and wildly accelerated expectations due to the always-on and instant nature that it instigated. Suddenly, your boss and colleagues could now see when you were online, leading to hyper-surveillance and increased pressure and anxiety to perform and prove your value at all times. And with that comes a wide range of new problems due to the blurring of personal boundaries. Of course, this shift didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual process, where messenger tools like Skype and Slack became more common in businesses, but were not necessarily considered professional. It was still considered novel and impolite or unprofessional to Skype someone, whereas email was the correct and appropriate way to communicate professionally. But while this was happening, something else was going on in the background, brewing and festering. Social media adoption was rising, and so was the use of smartphones. And with that came the need for quick and instantaneous responses, wherever you are and whenever you desired. Thus, the app notification was born. This nagging little jingle that would hook us back in. And this gradually switched from the computer or laptop to the phone. Suddenly, it was becoming increasingly normal to send a text message or comment and get a fast response publicly or within a semi-public forum. We can thank platforms like Twitter or Facebook for that. And this habit later evolved into the work group chat, something that was made popular with apps like Slack, and eventually the behemoth that we know today as Microsoft Teams. With these group chats, you're now not only having your work conversations seen and scrutinized by peers, but even your clients are getting access here and there, something that was a massive taboo previously, and still is in a lot of workplaces today. But as you can see, we were facing an erosion of personal boundaries, a blurring of the lines, and an increase in expectations to respond and be always available. But it still wasn't too bad. The term "send me an email" was still quite acceptable when someone was overstepping your boundaries. But then something else happened that changed things. By this time, I would say it was maybe 2018 or so, and Microsoft started aggressively pushing Teams as a competitor to Slack, and in doing so, it started phasing out Skype. My first reaction to this was, oh wow, another ridiculous messaging app that no one likes. But something else was coming that none of us were prepared for. If you were employed during 2019 and going into the year 2020, you'll know exactly what I'm referring to.
Coronavirus first emerged in the Chinese city of Wuhan in December. There have been tens of thousands of cases.
They declared COVID-19 is now a pandemic. What started in China has now spread to more than 100 countries.
He's the first governor to order a containment zone here in the U.S. and to call on the National Guard to help prevent the spread of the coronavirus.
The United States is starting to shut down as millions of Americans are working from home.
Before we go down the pandemic rabbit hole, I want to avoid making this video about COVID or working from home versus working from the office and all of that, because it's really not about that. I want to zone in and focus on the core problem at hand, our ways of working and communicating as a society. And before we get into our separate camps of work from home versus work from office arguments, I want to be clear where I stand. Working from home is a beautiful advantage and a logical conclusion for anyone that does the majority of their work on the internet. You get to be closer to your family and personal endeavors, and you get to control just how much of yourself you expose to others at any given time. But it does come with its inherent risks to our culture and to our mental health when left in the hands of our corporate overlords, these sociopathic tyrants that run large companies and make sweeping decisions that influence society. You see, there were these already blurring lines of being always online, always available, and Teams messaging colleagues from phones, having work notifications going off after hours, just quickly messaging that one colleague or quickly replying to your boss. And being always on at home during lockdown through the pandemic made damn sure that everyone knew you really were technically always available. And if you didn't reply, it meant you were choosing not to. A shameful rudeness, right? This created an inherent guilt from not responding, tapping into a deep psychological need to be seen as good and valuable to our social groups, thus exploiting our kindness. But let's not get hung up on how we communicate, but also what the blurring of work hours and increased pressure to respond meant from a productivity point of view. Increased expectation meant increased outputs, which increased workloads, and led to the normalizing or even celebrating of overworking or over-delivering, regardless of the quality of the work or what it was doing to the person delivering it. All of this just to keep up appearances and to keep up with the new and growing demand. This naturally had damning consequences, since we as humans can only do so much in a day, and we can only keep burning at these levels for so long before feeling the consequences. And the worst part of all of this is that the trend is getting worse. A recent study published in the Electronics Journal of MDPI in 2022, 2 years after the pandemic, concluded that the technological invasion of workers' personal lives was the main predictor of stress and negative well-being. People are not able to separate from their work communication, and the impact was felt most between younger age groups. And this brings us to where we are today. At the time of making this, it's now 2025, and we're at the forefront of the AI revolution. But more on that later. I'd like to stop for a second and collect our thoughts. This is a lot of seismic changes that happened over the course of just 10 years. And it feels like more changes than in any of the decades preceding the 2010s. Now, I'm really curious, if you're from a generation that was working during the 80s or 90s or even early 2000s, I'd love to hear from you in the comments what you think of all these shifts over the years, and if the 2010s really was the most insane change of pace, or if it's just me. And if you're younger and only recently started your working career, as someone who grew up with social media and instant messaging, what has the working experience been like for you? Do you also feel overwhelmed by work expectations? Or am I just older and not adjusting well to the changes? Regardless of our age or background, it's undeniable that things are changing, and not necessarily in a good way. In this next part of the video, I really want to try and understand what the effects of this are on society, us as people, so we can understand just what is happening to us because of these changes, and be better informed on how to react and deal with them. Part 2. Burnout culture. There is one thing we all have in common. We all need rest and to look after our mental health. And I feel like this is an area of growing concern over the last few years. And there are many, many reasons for this. But one of the biggest factors, I believe, is information overload, brought on by what I'm referring to as hyperconnectivity fatigue. And this doesn't just happen in our work lives, but it extends well beyond that into our personal lives too. Basically, I believe we're simply too connected, too overloaded with information, and we're unable to disconnect. To the point where we're mentally breaking down from exhaustion, trying to keep up with it all. We're working faster, harder, longer hours, doing more for less, and it's coming at the cost of our sanity. And in doing so, we're quite literally losing touch with ourselves and each other. We are becoming machines. And if you watch to the end of the video, you'll get a much better idea of what I mean by that. And it's scary. So, with this hyperconnectivity fatigue, the immediate result is burnout. But what exactly is burnout? You've probably heard of it, and I imagine quite a lot if you're out there in the working world. The exact definition of burnout is a little murky. The World Health Organization does not classify it as an actual medical condition, although I think they should. But psychology researchers such as Christina Maslach define burnout by 3 key characteristics. Number 1, emotional exhaustion, feeling drained or overwhelmed and unable to cope. Number 2, depersonalization or cynicism, developing a detached, negative, or indifferent attitude towards work or responsibilities. Number 3, reduced personal accomplishment, feeling ineffective, unmotivated, and doubting one's own competence. Sound familiar? These are so common, I think we can probably all relate. and there have been multiple studies showing this. There was an Indeed study in 2021 that found that 52% of workers experienced burnout. And another study by Gallup in 2020 cited that 76% of workers reported burnout. Microsoft Teams' own research in 2021 showed that 54% of workers were overworked and 39% had reported exhaustion. And here's another one. American Psychology Association 2021, 60% of workers reported burnout. These are all separate studies finding the same thing over and over again. My friends, we're not coping well. It is now considered normal to feel burnout. Majority of workers are going through this. But why? Why is this happening? Well, we know a huge part of it is hyperconnectivity, the always-on culture. But it goes much deeper than that. Our very humanity is being eroded, and our culture is dying, being replaced by a new pseudo-culture of disconnected shells of our former selves. Our expectations of each other is changing, and companies are not doing anything about it. In fact, in a lot of instances, they're making it worse. Tell me if this sounds familiar. Sarah was voted Employee of the Month for going above and beyond. She worked late nights on XYZ project over the last 3 weeks, and our clients reported a satisfaction score of 7 out of 10. The company has cleared a huge profit. Thank you, Sarah, for your efforts. The reality here is that Sarah probably didn't get a pay rise. She didn't get promoted even. And very likely, her family and physical health suffered tremendously, so that someone more senior than her can brag about a negligible percentage increase in earnings. And a month from now, no one will remember the overtime work that she did. Unpaid overtime, by the way. Slavery. But you know who will remember? Sarah's kids, who sat waiting for mom to get off the Teams calls, who wonder why mom doesn't have time to cook food or spend time with them anymore. Or maybe her distant family or friends who haven't heard from her in weeks because she's stuck on the computer or exhausted from commuting to the office space. And herein lies the fallacy of modern burnout culture. We are celebrating unpaid overtime and exhaustion, which again, I reiterate, this is slavery. Maybe not in the traditional sense, but work without compensation, I would say, is a type of modern slavery. We are celebrating and creating a culture that praises disconnecting from your family and personal duties and encourages profit and work output over the well-being of its people, while pretending not to. This is a sad reality because it means that we're no longer putting the same value on our human lives. We treat each other like machines, churning out task after task. We are becoming machines. Here's another example, and this one is a bit more detailed, so tell me if you can relate to this. You just started a new job. They demand you are in the office 3 days a week, even though your duties are performed 100% online. You commute for, let's say, 2 hours a day, only to sit in an open-plan office on Teams calls the whole day, in an office space that sounds like a Bavarian-style Oktoberfest. You're overloaded with tasks and no time to do said tasks because 6 out of your 7 work hours are occupied by Teams meetings. Then your coworkers coerce you into joining them for a lunch, which takes away that 1 hour a day that you had free to yourself, only to talk about, you guessed it, work. And then you're finally home, maybe at 8 o'clock at night, and now your personal life starts, and you have kids to look after, food to cook, laundry to do. You get in bed maybe 10 or 11, exhausted, too tired to exist, and the next day, you need to do it all again, catching up on the inevitable backlog that has built up while you were in Teams meetings. A couple of months go by. Suddenly, you've picked up 10 pounds because you're not moving, and somehow you've developed piles from sitting on your ass all day on Teams calls, while the backlog keeps growing and growing. Your manager checks in with you probably during your lunch break, or maybe at 5 p.m., because now he has time to talk to you, only to shame you for underperforming and not getting to the Olympian volume of work you've been missing while on Teams calls. Okay, maybe that was a little exaggerated, but I can speak from personal experience that this isn't too far off from reality. So tell me in the comments if you experienced something like this. How did you deal with it? So you get the picture. What we have here is a toxic work culture. So what do? You tell your manager. What if your manager is the problem? You tell their manager. Maybe they call an after-hours meeting because senior members of the company are so entrenched in working unpaid overtime that they see no problem meeting at these hours. Again, when it's convenient for them. And remember, you're just selfish for not working overtime to catch up. Everyone else is doing it, so why can't you? Or maybe you go to HR and they just give you some links to the company's wellness perks and allies, some colleagues that have joined some kind of a support group. Because remember, you're the problem, not them. You just can't manage your time better. You see what's happening here? Here, have a look at this cartoon skit and tell me if this sounds familiar to you.
Hey there. Are you having a bad day? That's alright. Just remember, fucking get over it. Stop being weird.
Clearly, there is a lot more educational and cultural reform work to be done. It's also starting to surface that burnout is costing the global economy about $1 trillion per year, according to the World Health Organization estimates in 2024, which is prompting corporations to take action. But the uptake has been slow and insincere, as you can see by that skit. My friends, this is a systemic problem. It's the entropy of work culture, the dehumanizing of the workforce, and it cannot be stopped just by escalating within a company. There is a broader societal issue at play. So what can be done about it? Well, keep watching because there might be a solution in sight. So we've covered the health impacts and cultural erosion that's happening, the conflation of working from home with always on and always working, which defeats the purpose of working from home in the first place. But what we haven't spoken about yet is the technological factors that are driving these changes. And much of this started with one company, Amazon. So I'd like to shift our focus towards something I'm calling the rise of the machines, or automation. And this doesn't just apply to physical jobs like shipping and logistics. It's embedded in everything we do, and it's growing at a rate that we can't possibly keep up with. Part 3. The Rise of the Machines. In 2005, Amazon set a new standard of 2-day delivery turnarounds, which became accepted as the gold standard for online shopping delivery. Other companies had to optimize their operations to meet the demand, and everywhere 2-day shipping was considered lightning fast, kind of like priority mail. But it didn't stop there. In 2012, Amazon acquired Kiva Systems, a company that specialized in warehouse automation, and by 2014, over 1,000 robots were embedded across Amazon's warehouses. The number of robots rose from 1,000 to over 100,000 by 2019. And then Amazon did something unprecedented. They launched same-day shipping, a feat previously thought impossible, yet again raising the expectations of consumers. And all of this was only possible not because of people, but because of machines and AI-powered conveyor systems, much like the Industrial Revolution driven by Henry Ford. Then, as if by magic timing, when the pandemic struck in 2020, demand for online shopping skyrocketed as everyone was stuck at home with nothing to do except work from home and shop from home. Amazon had struck gold, and the rest is, well, history. So as you can see, our expectations from companies is going well beyond what's humanly possible. But here's where it gets really dark. And I'll continue with the example of Amazon. because it'll be important later, and you'll see why. So yes, while this is an amazing improvement in productivity and years ahead of its time, we're not ready for this level of work expectation. Just imagine being an employee at Amazon while this was going on. Suddenly, the job you signed up for starts to exponentially shorten its deadlines and work you to the bone, to the point where you need AI and robots just to keep up. Well, you can imagine what the result is. And I'll pause here to ask, are any of you watching currently working in a warehouse setup that's automated like this? Or maybe you previously worked at Amazon? Let me know in the comments what your experience was. I'm really curious. So what happened next? Reports started flooding in of employee abuse at Amazon. In 2012, shortly after the introduction of Kiva Robotics, a BBC undercover investigation revealed shocking work conditions similar to those in sweatshops. Warehouse workers were expected to pack items every 30 seconds and penalized for being idle for more than a minute. It also surfaced that workers would end up walking over 15 miles in a day and suffered from extreme fatigue and exhaustion, plus extreme anxiety and stress on top of that. And above all of this, temporary workers were hit hardest, having been denied permanent contracts and suffered prolonged lack of job security. In response to this, Amazon denied all allegations of any wrongdoing, but it was an eye-opening foreshadowing for worse things to come, and not just from Amazon. And you guys, this was more than 10 years ago. You can only imagine how bad it must be now. Barely a year later, 2013, The Guardian releases an article. First-hand accounts of an undercover reporter who was in the trenches at Amazon during Black Friday, the busiest time of the year to work in retail. This scathing review exposed the cult-like indoctrination of warehouse staff through different color badges and inhumane work conditions that these people had grown to accept as normal. We can see the extreme micromanagement and surveillance that leaves workers feeling dehumanized, expendable, and exhausted. Because, well, they are. Now, it sounds like I'm singling Amazon out specifically, but really the same exact things were happening elsewhere in different ways. I'm just using Amazon as an example because of how blatant and stark the changes were during that time, and because Amazon is part of what is now referred to as the Big Five tech giants, which I will explain a bit more later why this is so concerning. But the point is, Amazon alone employs about 1 million people in the US. That's a huge portion for a single company to employ, meaning that their sphere of influence is insane. But you don't have to work directly for a big tech company to feel the effects of their work culture and ethics seeping into other firms. It manifests in our usage of their platforms and how we choose to interact with each other in those contexts. You really can't escape it. Take Microsoft Teams, for example. It's embedded so deeply, or Google or WhatsApp. These are just considered normal, what everyone uses. And they are controlled by just a handful of holding companies. The Big Five tech giants, anachronized as MAMA, M-A-M-A-A, Microsoft, Amazon, Meta, Alphabet, the holding company of Google and also the owners of YouTube, and finally, Apple. Collectively, these giants control 70 to 80% of internet searches, 65 to 75% of cloud storage, 80 to 90% of consumer electronics, 75 to 85% of social media and messaging, 50 to 60% of e-com and retail data, 75 to 85% of digital advertising, and finally, 50 to 60% of streaming and entertainment. So, what this means is that up to 80% of all internet activity flows through these companies. They know what we're doing at all times. They own our phones, our conversations, what we buy, what we like, what we watch. They own our existence as long as we are online. These statistics are staggering, and it paints a very grim Orwellian picture of what our future might look like if we continue to allow these behemoths to retain their dominance within our lives. But that's just from a consumer perspective. When we look at this from a work perspective, one of these companies dominates with an iron fist. And that brings us back to this little bastard right here, Teams. So why is this so dangerous? A lot of people use Teams, what's the big deal, right? Well, aside from burnout culture and inhumane expectations and mental health risks, there is also a morality and technological factor that we haven't looked at yet, and it's a silent killer, a sleeper agent, a harbinger of doom that you're probably not aware of. Most people either don't know about it or won't care until it's too late. Let me explain. Part 4. They're spying on you. So at this point, you're probably wondering what the hell I'm on about. Well, get ready for this.
So some employers are turning to productivity management software or other kinds of surveillance to track their employees while they work from home.
If you are in fact working in the employer's place of business using employer-provided laptops and or other computer equipment, you are absolutely being monitored and surveilled.
Yeah, it's exactly as scary as it sounds. Microsoft has built-in tools in Teams that's meant to be productivity tracking to understand how engaged or busy your team is. But these can very easily be used to zoom in to single-user cases and essentially spy on anything that you're doing, including how present you are, or identify your work behavior patterns. There's a really good video by a channel called Pragmatic Works if you're interested, where they go into detail on how exactly it does this. I've left a link in the description so you can go check it out. So, straight out of the box, there's a couple of things worth mentioning here. In 2022, Microsoft rolled out an update making it more difficult to spy on individual user activity. It won't pull out a report saying Mike Mazowski did XYZ and was online 6 out of his 8 work hours, etc. But it will show hashed user IDs, which can be reversed engineered, or even deduced through small cohorts to find out who's who. Or if you have some coding knowledge, you can write scripts to figure it out too. So the tools to do it are there. You just need a sociopathic enough boss or a good enough reason to do it. And trust me, they'll find a way. Now, at first glance, you might think, okay, sure, but who's seriously going to take the time to do this and learn code, etc., to figure out and snoop on you? Well, now with the rise of AI and Copilot built into Office 365, you don't even need any coding knowledge. Just ask the AI to snoop for you. And yeah, there are some privacy laws like GDPR in the EU and CCPA in states like California, making it harder for companies to do this legally. But for majority of the US, this type of snooping is not illegal. In fact, there are entire software products made for exactly this purpose. And here, my friends, is where it starts to go from invasive to downright dystopian and creepy. Let me introduce you to Teramind. Now guys, I'm gonna be straight up here. I don't know how the hell this is even legal, but somehow, across most of the US, it is. It's estimated that about 30% of firms are already using this software, mostly in the finance and legal sectors. Basically, Teramind is promoted as a productivity tracking tool, but in reality, what it's doing is keystroke tracking, aggregating everything you type, taking intermittent screenshots of whatever's going on your screen. And this could be every 5 minutes, 1 minute, or even down to 30 seconds, depending on how it's been configured. And it's tracking whether you're actually doing stuff online or if you're just idle. And that's not even the worst of it. To top it off, it also uses pattern recognition and can send notifications to your boss whenever you've been idle for more than a certain amount of time. Basically, this is the most invasive and draconian form of tracking software out there. It basically violates your privacy and takes a big ol' shit on trust and confidentiality. Let's say you wanted to go log into your personal bank account at work, just quickly for something important. Or you want to log in to access your personal medical records or something important or time sensitive. It's no longer safe for you to do that on your work PC, because someone with Teramind access could potentially obtain your logins or even see your personal medical files. The software also flags up anything that it detects as suspicious. And I don't know about you, but sometimes I like to share a funny or interesting thing with a coworker. And I might do a Google search that's not always work safe. It could be flagged as suspicious. Or let's say you type in a swear word in a private conversation with a colleague. Or I don't know, say something about a senior person in the company in a private chat. That's all 100% monitored and retrievable. And it can be automated. And the worst part is, it's not even illegal in most states. And Teramind is just one of many tools like this that are being used out there. Here's a list of the top 4 that I found out about. There's a brilliant video by Joshua Fluke, a fellow YouTuber I follow, where he goes into a bit more depth about Teramind and the ethical implications. I'll leave a link in the description, and I encourage you to go check it out and subscribe to him if you aren't already. So in the EU, naturally this is a massive GDPR violation. So Teramind went and introduced a GDPR compliance mode, which essentially switches off the most pervasive of its features, meaning they are well aware that a lot of what they're doing is considered illegal, or at the very least extremely unethical. But just think of the implications from a mental health and human standpoint as well. Is this really how we want to work as humans? Are we going to accept this? Being monitored and experimented on like some kind of lab rats at work? Little notifications going to the boss every time you decide to step away from your desk or, God forbid, go to the toilet? Again, this just promotes this unethical burnout culture of being always on, but it absolutely kicks it up to overdrive. Okay, so how do you know if your employer is using Teramind or one of these invasive tracking softwares? Well, it's not always easy to know, actually. Technically, they should disclose it as part of their IT policy, but many won't outright reveal it. They'll obfuscate it so you don't fully know what they're using. And even if they did disclose it to you, how many people would even know what the hell Teramind even is, let alone its capabilities? I know I didn't until I made this video. The bottom line is, these companies do not care about your mental health. They're scared and they don't trust you. That much is clear. My question is then, why hire someone that you do not trust? All good relationships in life are built on trust and mutual respect. And if those things aren't present, you're setting yourself up for failure, right? I don't know. What are your thoughts about this, guys? Now, all of this becomes even more scary when you introduce the element of AI. Because aside from sociopaths, stalkers, and sadists, most people just don't have the time or don't give a shit enough to put in the effort to do this kind of snooping, unless they really have nothing to do, or if you're being investigated for something. But what if they didn't have to? What if a machine was doing the spying automatically for them, collating and building out quote-unquote productivity scoring for different aspects of your work, and surfacing what it defines as not acceptable? Well, that's exactly what's happening. With software like this becoming the norm, what can we actually do to fight back and regain our human rights and our dignity? How do you fight back against the tech giants when they're so deeply entrenched? I believe the answer lies within each one of us, and I'll explain why. Part 5. Fighting back. Sure, individually it's impossible to fight back or at least it feels like it. It's like screaming into a thunderstorm. You just won't win. That's why the power lies in our ability to influence one another. One of the ways that often comes up in fighting back these oppressive, toxic cultures and unethical work practices is practicing mindfulness. And yes, this is something that can be absolutely life-changing because it will ground you not just at work, but also in other areas of your life. Without oversimplifying, I would describe this as allowing yourself to be your number one priority, prioritizing your mental health and well-being above all else, taking care of yourself and being present in your own life. Now, that's easier said than done, but it also only impacts you, and it's just the first piece of the puzzle, the first step. And not everyone has the strength to adopt mindfulness, and especially not in the case of being dominated by, a middle manager on a little power trip. It's also really just a coping mechanism. It doesn't tackle the systemic changes that are needed, so let's explore some of the practical initiatives that have been tested and studied. Number 1, the 4-day work week. This sounds amazing, right? Well, it is. But the truth is, most companies will never admit that this is a possibility, because this would mean that admitting that their workforce was so unproductive that they were only doing 4 days work in the space of 5 to begin with. And I don't know about you, but every time I have a 4-day week at work, those 4 days are so intensely jam-packed with work that it's just not worth the added stress. But maybe that's just me. Let me know in the comments how it is for you. Has your employer tried the 4-day work week? How did it go? I'm really curious. Something interesting is that there have actually been multiple trials of 4-day work weeks, and in almost every one of them, companies improved productivity and revenue, and employees had improved work satisfaction and fewer reports of burnout. For example, Microsoft in Japan tried this out and saw a 40% jump in productivity. Similar findings were also seen by Stanford University, where they had a 20 to 30% increase in productivity. And the University of Cambridge analyzed 30 different studies, concluding that the 4-day work week improved productivity and mental health. So then, why aren't more companies doing this? Well, to be blunt, arrogance, stubbornness, and insecurity. They fear losing control and admitting that they may not always know better than you. Then there's also the argument that squeezing 5 days work into 4 would just put extra pressure in most companies. And maybe that's true, maybe not. I think it depends on the organization, to be honest. The next thing I'd like to point out as a solution to burnout culture is legislation. Number 2, legislation and unions. Nothing makes large corporates move faster than the fear of a lawsuit or fine, which ultimately leads to loss of money and damage to reputation. But passing laws that protect employees is difficult in a lot of countries. Now, I'm no legal expert, but I know that labor laws change country to country. For example, GDPR in the EU is a helpful tool to protect employees' privacy. But there are countries or even states in the US where unionizing or giving employees more rights is not as easy as it sounds. And it takes ages, by which time so much damage is already done. So while this method, if successful, is probably the most effective, it can take a very long time to lobby and influence people in positions of power to deploy these kinds of legal changes. And it's made especially frustrating when a lot of the lawmakers often have some kind of ulterior motive or even ties to the corporations that the laws would affect. So they surely wouldn't do something that's going to impact their own income or reputation. So yeah, it is tricky. I do believe, though, that this will be the most important factor in ensuring that our future work culture, mental health, and way of working as a society is protected, and we don't dip into a dystopian, enslaved future ruled by AI and the rich elite. I guess you could argue we're already somewhat there, but it's going to get a lot worse if we don't do more to fight back now. But it's not all doom and gloom. Some of the movements we've seen already towards protecting employees from burnout would be things like Starbucks Workers United or Amazon Labor Union. These initiatives are making inroads to taking back dignity and avoiding exploitation, not to mention new unions within gaming development to protect workers from crunch culture. Here's looking at you, EA. So you might be wondering, what can I do now? What actions would or could possibly have any impact, if anything at all? Or must I just wait it out and see what happens? Well, you might be surprised. Let me tell you what I believe. Here is the last on my list of solutions to fight back. Number 3. Culture shift towards a people-first mentality. We all have a responsibility in solving this issue, guys. Our job as affected employees is to not tolerate it, not normalize it. And if you are in a position at your place of work where you manage or supervise even just one person, then you have the biggest responsibility in this. It doesn't extend just to upper management or the big dogs on the top. It starts at every level where you can influence. So what exactly am I on about? I'm talking about living your values, and if your values are to protect people's rights and humanity, and to be treated with dignity and respect, then make sure you're doing that yourself. Simple as that. How this can transpire would be things like decline that after-hours work meeting with your boss or coworker. Allow tasks to fail if you've communicated over and over that you're overloaded. Don't work unpaid overtime, just don't do it. Or even smaller things like decline that meeting that was placed in your lunch break if you can. If you have something personal you can't move, don't cancel the personal thing to favor your work. Look after yourself. Put you first. Explain and be vocal about your values. Not necessarily bitchy so you come across like spiteful, but just be firm, you know? For instance, you could say something like, "This goes against our core hours policy," or you can simply say, "Sorry, I'm unavailable during that time." And if complaints or escalations arise, bat it away to your manager. It's their job to solve things like this, and they're the ones that should be protecting you. So take back your dignity. And on the unlikely event that it does escalate and you do get fired, you should find an employer that does respect you. It's not worth selling your dignity and value system to please someone who has no respect for you. Now, I know it can be really hard to do, especially if it's not in your nature to disappoint people, or if you're new to an organization and it feels like you're swimming against an ocean of toxic culture and work habits that are deeply entrenched. But over time, as your sphere of influence increases, make sure you're using it as a force for good and standing your ground. Now, don't get me wrong, protecting yourself first doesn't mean throw everyone else under the bus. In fact, what you'll find, at least from my experience, is that over time people will actually respect you more for protecting their mental well-being and for fighting for their rights. And ultimately you'll get better results at work too, and have more space to breathe and to just be human. But guys, I cannot stress this enough. It starts with all of us seeing each other as human beings and placing a value on that. But not just that, it also means showing it. It's something that AI or automation simply cannot replicate and cannot replace. And we all need to protect each other, lest we fall victim to the machines. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. I know this is quite different from a lot of the spooky and dark content I usually cover, but I really feel strongly that we're headed for a real-life dystopian horror if we don't raise awareness and take the action to stop the rising toxic work culture. So let me know in the comments what your experience has been. I'd love to hear your thoughts about what we can do as a society to fight these issues, because it's only going to get more difficult from here. And guys, if you like these types of videos, I'd be honored if you'd consider subscribing. And here are some other videos you might find interesting. Well, that's all I have for this video. So until next time, good night.